Welcome to our 75th podcast. Today we'll be talking about questions. What makes a good question and how good questions can facilitate change. As usual, we'll also share some key takeaways. What can you do to ask good questions for better change? Keep listening to find out. Welcome to Harmonious Workplaces, a podcast about corporate culture, organizational change management, and workplace behavior. Harmonious Workplaces was started by independent consultants Rich Cruz, Ben Kleinman, and Cheryl Volpe to explore, challenge, and build on various organizational culture and change management concepts. It's a blend of theory and practice based on their personal and professional experiences working with companies of all sizes across various industries. If you own a business, lead a team, want new ideas about the corporate environment, or just want to listen to a group of consultants talking about how to make work more enjoyable, we invite you to sit back, relax, and dive in with us to Harmonious Workplaces. Hello, Harmonious Workplaces listeners. Welcome back to our podcast. I'm Rich Cruz, an organizational development consultant, and joined by my co-host and co-author and co-everything else, Ben Kleinman. How are you, Ben?
Hey, everyone. Doing okay, Rich. How are things?
Hey, you just asked a question, Ben, and I'm doing well. And that's what we're going to be talking about today.
I love that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, right? These little questions, but they mean so much to us humans, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
we're talking about questions, and so maybe the best place to start is with a question.
Sure.
What is driving your interest in questions, or why was this something that was jumping out at you as a topic we might talk about with our listeners?
Well, there's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, questions have been coming up in conversation in a variety of different channels, right? The SHRM, so our first acronym of the day, Society Human Resources Management, got that out of the way.
Ding, ding, ding.
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah, SHRM and here's another acronym, OD Network, right? The Organizational Development Network.
Okay.
They've put out a few things that, like webinars and the like, that have brought into conversation, asking questions. But then, if anybody doesn't know, one of our recent guests, Dr. Jana Van Thiel, I keep wanting to say Thiel, but Jana, Dr. J, she was on, she has her own podcast, all right, Quest to the Core, and that's with the number 2. And one of their most recent episodes had the topic of questions, right? But as I think about like things like negotiation, as I think about things like how do we sell, and really change is largely about selling, right, to the people that we're having as stakeholders. What better way to do that than questions, right? I'll say one other thing is that I have been getting some kind of mentorship and advice from a consultant, David Bowen. And David has been challenging me to ask more questions, as not only as I engage clients and prospects, but also when I'm in the actual change process. Really, he's been challenging me a lot more. So that's why it's top of mind, Ben.
Cool.
How about you?
That's great. That's great.
Do you
There's so much to unpack there. I think that's fantastic. And I guess one of the first things maybe is we should probably think about defining what a good question is, or
Sure.
maybe what a better type of question is. We could also think about how long people have been researching questions or thinking about asking good questions. And then one of the things you mentioned had to do with selling. And I think you meant selling not necessarily in the type of going around door to door selling encyclopedias or steak knives, but it could be that. It could also be just as we're talking about transformations, change management, organizational design, those kinds of things. How do you engage with your stakeholders and help them see your vision? how do you get them to buy into where you're trying to go with things?
For sure.
Which in many ways it can be a form of selling, but maybe that's more what you had in mind.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, sales has a when somebody says selling, right? It has a stigma to it that they're like, oh,
Yeah,
I don't want to have anything to do with that. I'm not a salesperson. But the reality is that negotiations, persuasion, right? These are things that we have to do. This is how we function as a society and as organizations,
right,
right? So there's always going to be some degree of having to convince somebody. If you don't want to
right.
use the word sales, right? But it's convincing somebody
Well,
really.
and in many ways, there's sales and discussions and conversations and questions are all so interlinked that
Right.
it's really hard to do anything without having some kind of question at the core, and
Right.
using that as a way to build rapport or craft a sort of shared space, a shared narrative as you build that relationship.
Sure.
Yeah.
And Ben, so when you do your work as a consultant with healthcare
Yeah.
organizations as well as other ones, have you found a certain type of questioning or well, first of all, do you use questions
Oh, of course. Yeah.
and how does that play out for you?
Yeah. So much of it has to do with just asking what seem like very basic questions, because oftentimes to me they are very foundational type of questions. Why are
Hmm.
you doing this? Why is this organization interested in X, Y, or Z? Or why is this important to the organization right now? And digging into that. And so the type of question will depend a lot on where the organization is in the journey, where I am in coming into that journey, because a lot of times people have thought about these things well before I get involved. And
Sure.
so trying to jump in midstream, calibrating that question to where that thought process or that execution process might be, and then sort of tailoring the question to the level of detail that I'm trying to get at and the level that I think might be helpful for the other people, like we were just talking about, and trying to build relationships with people throughout the organization who may be having to learn something new or do something differently or adapt to a new way of working,
Hmm.
helping them to understand where we're going by the types of questions I'm asking other people to learn about what this change might be, or to ask them what's important to them. Where are they in their, is this brand new to them, or have they already heard about this, or have they been in it for quite some time? And then they're going to have a different set of questions or needs based on where they are in their change journey. So the type of question really depends a lot on where all these different factors are. And I know that's kind of a very fuzzy answer, but we can unpack that a little bit
No, I
more if you
think
like.
yeah, no, I think you nailed that. I mean, so the first part of this is kind of the assessment part and the fact finding questions part, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's
Discovery, fact finding,
yeah,
basic understandings. A lot of consultants use those types of terms. There's probably terms that you have in the academic world, or the you see a lot more in the literature that talk about that. But discovery, fact finding, creating
sure.
that foundation is just so important. And one of the things that I've found is that as you go around asking these questions, you invariably hear different ways of interpreting the answers. And so different people will often say similar things, and sometimes they're the exact same things, but there's
Mhm.
nuances that people will give you answers to in terms of why are we doing this? Why is this important? Who are the key stakeholders? Those kinds of things. And so
Right.
understanding those nuances and unpacking those with a series of nuanced questions can be very helpful in gaining traction or understanding where you might be able to go a little further, a little faster, or where you might need to tread a little more delicately, or where you might need to finesse things a little bit more. Those can be as important as just that bedrock discovery, fact finding type of question.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Casey DeBryan, who was a recent
Another guest, yeah.
guest, uh, he mentioned he's like the secret, to understanding how effective change is going to happen, right, and how people can adapt and all that is just asking them, you know, just bringing that into the conversation, having them talk it
Right,
out, yeah,
right. Well, I don't know
yeah,
if your teachers in elementary school, grade school, were drilling it into your head, but they would always say, "Ask, don't just assume." And there's the acronym there about assuming and whatnot, but it just seems like there's um, a lot of the better teachers that I've had growing up
hmm,
in elementary school, high school, college, post grad, whatever, just in life is
sure,
always saying, just ask someone, what are
right,
they feeling? Why are they responding in a certain way? What's important to
sure,
them? That kind of thing.
sure,
And so it does a lot of things to help with that relationship, but also help your understanding so you don't go barreling down a path of X, Y, or Z, and then you realize, oh, that was not the best thing to do.
hmm, hmm. But in those formative years that you had mentioned there, right? I guess it does really depend on what your experience is, because we have some people who are reticent to answer
Mm-hmm.
questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
For
Like
fears
any
of,
teenager.
like, right, any teenager, for sure, for sure. Yeah, the
Uh,
the
yeah,
grunt,
grunt.
or the
Meh.
the very
I don't know.
Boolean yes no answer to what was obviously an open-ended question.
Right.
Uh,
Right. So
yes,
that's one thing I would love to see if we could talk about today, because that's something that is eternal. Wherever you are, whether it's at home with a teenager or at the workplace with a colleague who might not be interested in engaging for whatever reason, how do you start to tease out some answers and keep that conversation going or build that
sure,
relationship? So, um,
sure.
didn't mean to interrupt, but I would love to
No, no, you got it.
talk
You
through
got it.
that a little bit more today.
Yeah. Well, let's do this. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, let's talk a little bit more about that.
I love that.
All
Don't
right.
go away, because we're going to tell you how to solve your communication challenges with teens and preteens in 5 minutes or less.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Dr. Spock, I am not.
I
All
know, right? Yeah.
Whew. All right. We'll be right back. Dysfunctional organizational cultures and poorly managed transformations can devastate employee morale and motivation, leading to disengaged employees, poor work quality, and the loss of your best people. The impacts to your organization include high costs, low productivity, and wasted resources. At Harmonious Workplaces, our purpose is to help you build the best workplace possible. We are advisors applying proven organizational development and industrial organizational psychology methodologies to help you become your best organization. We are doers, using time-tested principles to help you execute organizational change initiatives smoothly and successfully. To discover how harmonious workplaces can impact your organization, visit www.harmoniousworkplaces.com and book a free 30-minute information session with one of our consultants today. Again, that's www.harmoniousworkplaces.com. And we're back. So, Ben, questions. We've been talking about questions, and then we teed this up with questions with the youths of
The
today.
youth. Yeah. I should also say that a lot of times questions can be very culturally dependent,
Mhm.
and that in the West, sometimes people ask and respond to questions very differently than in other cultures. There's oftentimes a directness in at least American companies or Western European countries. A lot of times there's a very direct just a very blunt question in some
Right.
cultures, and the expectation that you're going to get a very direct and blunt response back. And not that
Sure.
that's seen as rude, that's seen as efficient, and that's seen as factual, and that's seen as respectful of the other person. That's very, very different in other cultures. And so you have to understand that at play as well.
For sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And to that effect, when it comes to how we've grown up, I think that's how we teed this up before.
Yeah.
Those formative years of as we were in school, as we were participating in sports or other programs, right?
Yeah.
I think the level to which somebody had their questions answered in a receptive and inviting and encouraging way will allow somebody to be a little more extroverted, open, agreeable, right, to answering
Oh, of
these
course.
questions.
Yeah. If you are a very inquisitive person and you continuously get pushback or shut down from the others around you as a kid, with adults just sort of shutting you down, saying, "Stop asking questions, just do what I say." That
Right.
is gonna transform your journey as a youth into an adult versus, "Oh, that's a great question.
Yep.
Let's look into that. Why do you ask that? Why do you think that might be? What do you think might be the reason for X, Y, or Z?" And so it's just a very different dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that what you just said, that phrase there, I think is a bit of a game changer. Is when you say things like, "That's a great question," or "I'm glad you asked that,"
Yeah.
or something to that effect, because you are encouraging the process of having somebody think through what they're trying to get to,
Hmm.
what their end goal is. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. You're helping them pick up a little bit of autonomy and ownership of whatever that topic is, whether it's how to build
Yeah.
a model race car or understanding why an organization is changing the way its structure is, and all of that.
Sure.
Those are
Sure.
important. Um, before we help parents understand how to navigate the teenage years, I'm wondering if maybe we step back just a scooch and think
Sure.
about what we want to define as good questions or better questions, as opposed to questions that are maybe not as helpful in terms
Hmm.
of eliciting more engagement with whoever you're talking with.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
That so. What are your? Let me ask that question to you, Ben. What do you define as a good question, or a bad question, or a you know eh question?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rich. I'm so glad you asked. You like how we model good behavior,
There you go.
good
That's right.
questioning.
That's
I
awesome.
I
I
I
feel encouraged to ask you more.
I love that. That's so great. Gives me the warm and fuzzies. One of the things that I learned a lot in business school training was asking open-ended questions and not just
Mhm.
asking yes or no, those binary questions that you mentioned
Right.
before, yes, no, true, false, A or B. Open-ended questions have a way of opening space and allowing people to think and respond in a way that's meaningful to them, and don't necessarily assume that there's one right or wrong answer. And so
Mhm.
asking something a little bit more open-ended, it invites that sort of dialogue or exploration of the topic. One of the other things is that the question has to be somewhat relevant and clear. So you have to be very
Mhm.
clear about what you're asking and why you're asking it, and it's got to be relevant to whatever you're talking about. So a lot of times we'll be talking about something here at the house, and someone will just ask a question out of the blue because we know each other and we live with each other. There's
Sure.
historical relevance, but someone from outside would look at that and say, "Wow, that is a completely whiplash type of question. It came out of the blue." And so having
Sure.
that relevance, that sort of temporal and cultural relevance to our family would be something very important. And so in the workplace, that's as well. Oftentimes people start with, "Hey, how you doing? How was your weekend?" And then we'll segue into work. But as
Sure.
you're doing that in the middle of a work conversation, all of a sudden, if you ask something about a sporting event that happened a month ago, there's going to be a little bit of cognitive dissonance there, and so
That makes sense.
that's helpful there.
Absolutely.
How about you? What have you seen to be ways of asking or thinking about better questions, more helpful questions?
So yeah, I'm glad that you asked that, Ben, because I was thinking about this, and I think my question has gotten better over the last even just a couple of years than it
Okay.
has been historically, just because of the psychological training, going to school and all that, but
Yeah.
also some of the books that are out there that talk about, like starting with like the start with why question, right? Of from Simon Sinek, which is just a few years ago. We also have some support in research from uh, Jervis Bush and Dr. Marshak, where they talk about dialogic or organizational development, dialogic OD, which is about asking, it's really it's dialogue, right? And it's asking these kind of open-ended questions and getting
Hmm.
people involved. However, I think there is a place where those Boolean, yes or no kind of answers do serve a purpose,
Oh,
particularly when
absolutely.
it comes
Yeah.
to, yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm reminded of this book by Chris Voss. He was a former FBI negotiator,
Right. Right.
and I think we might have mentioned it before on the
Hmm.
podcast.
Yeah.
And his book is about asking questions, and those Boolean questions can have some real value.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that because there are also im- important differences between when you're asking which type of questions. So, for example, on a survey that you distribute out to stakeholders of any kind, where you're trying to gather information on some kind of used to be piece of paper, now it's all digital. Those yes/no questions can be very helpful and often um, more useful when you're trying to catalog data and understand data and look for insights as opposed to trying to tease through lots of open-ended text responses. And so those yes nos can be very helpful, eliciting preferences in a very simplistic kind of straightforward kind of way.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
there's all of that. You mentioned the power of why and Simon Sinek, and it reminded me that there are questions that go back quite a ways as well in literature and in manufacturing circles as far as the five whys, and that's
Mhm.
essentially asking why five layers down.
Getting
So
deeper into it. Yeah.
right, so it allows you to get, okay, why did this part fail? Why did that
Hmm.
process fail? Why did that thing that led to that process failing fail? And so you get down about five layers of that, and you can really unpack the root cause. Root cause analysis is another term for it. The root cause of what's going on and how you might fix it in a way that's productive and longer term, more sustainable, that kind of a thing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There's also another type of question that you can kind of ask, and that can be, you mentioned surveys, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in certain surveys, there's kind of the Likert scale, right? There's like the
Mm-hmm.
five
Mm-hmm.
scale degrees, or it could be 7 or 10. I mean, whatever it is. But
Yeah.
Likert's typically five,
Yeah.
right?
And
Of
that's just so everyone's super clear. It's like 1 to 5, 1 being best, 5 being worst, or vice versa, 1 being worst, 5 being best. And you just pick a number on that scale. So you get very
exactly,
clear answers.
right, right.
Yeah.
And we see this, in a change readiness questionnaire, for instance, right? You might have something where it's a scale of 1 to 5. How do you feel about
Yeah.
this or that, right?
Yeah.
Um, but you can also have those types of things in a dialogue, right? How?
Yeah.
If and I mean, we've even seen this in medical, the medical profession, right?
Yeah.
What's your pain threshold, right? Or
Right.
what's the pain you're feeling right now on a scale
Yeah.
of 1 to 10?
On a scale of
You
one
know,
to 10.
so
Yeah.
right, yeah,
Yeah. We're treading dangerously close to assessments. And so we have to give a shout out to Katie Thomas, who is the master of all things assessment.
for sure,
Yeah.
absolutely, yep. Another one of our guests. If you haven't seen that episode,
Mm-hmm.
great episode
Mm-hmm.
for sure.
One of 75 episodes. Can you believe that? Holy cow.
75. Yep, 3/4 of the way to 100, man. Almost there.
I love that. Yes.
Mm. All right, well, let's do this because we still haven't gotten to how are you going to,
I know, right?
as parents, how are you
How
going
do
to
you
do
pull
this?
out what your teenager was doing last night? Hmm.
Right. Mm. So, but
Stay
we're
tuned.
right there at that. We're right there at that break point again. So, um, let's come back in a second. Okay, we'll be right back.
Meet Hermie the HR Hermit Crab. Laugh, learn, and lead better with Hermie. Hermie is here to tackle workplace madness with heart and humor from Harmonious Workplaces. He's perfect for HR pros, leaders, and change makers. Hermie teaches workplace lessons through cartoons and is great for team discussions and workshops. Get your copy on Amazon now. www.hermiehrhermitcrab.com. Again, that's hermiehrhermitcrab.com.
And we're back. Ben, how we doing? Are we
I think
hitting these things that we need to hit for our question
it
episode
feels
here?
like we are. Probably not the best person to ask. So, mom,
We'd
you're
love
out
to
there
hear from.
listening. Let us know how we're doing.
That's right. Yeah, seriously, audience members, we'd love to have you know, your feedback. So,
Yeah. On
if
a scale
we're
of 1 to 5, or
or
on a
Boolean,
free
yes or
form
no.
answer, you can let us know
There you go. That's right.
how
Answer in the
we're
comments
doing,
wherever you're.
where you'd like to see us go in different directions, or what questions you have that we might be able to answer, or even better, what questions you have that Hermie the HR Hermit Crab might be able to answer for you,
Oh,
our
that's
resident
a
expert.
that's great, Ben. And in fact, if you do have a question about change, organizational development, or anything that we talk about, industrial organizational psychology or business or whatever, you can go to harmoniousworkplaces.com/ask Hermie. Leave your question there, and Hermie will answer you back
Mm-hmm.
in one
Mm-hmm.
way or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing him up.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our best buddy.
Which
So,
also, honestly, that's something that makes, if there's one thing about Hermie that we can kind of take away is he's very approachable, right? And we did that on purpose,
yeah.
right? He's a
Yeah.
change expert, but he's very approachable, and I think that's a big part of the whole questioning process, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, so we've been talking and teasing out that we're gonna solve all familial problems in 5 minutes or less, and so we may have built that up just a scooch. But I think there's probably a little bit that we can talk through around how to engage with people who don't want to engage or who don't want to answer whatever question you're trying to get them to answer. And
sure.
if that's okay, maybe we spend the last chunk of our segment thinking through all that.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have people who resist, right? I mean, I think that's kind of where we're talking about
Yeah,
here.
resist or who are hesitant to engage or hesitant to respond or for whatever reason just don't want to answer your question right then and there, or don't want to answer it in the way that you've asked or the way that it's implying that you want a certain answer. If you're asking something that is clearly yes or no, they may not want to give you a clear yes or no for whatever reason. If you're asking for something that's more open-ended, dialogic, that kind of thing, they may only want to give you a yes or no. And so it's how do you negotiate those waters that might be helpful to think through. So
Sure. Well, the one thing that we know that doesn't work is when you say, "Why can't you answer my question?" Or,
when you
or
ask the same question just louder or more
right,
angrily.
right, yes, none of that works. We all know that.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and we still have managers that, for whatever reason, they're frustrated or whatever. They're people too, right? That do that, right? They just continue to ask until they get some kind of a response, and usually it's not the kind of response that's going to be helpful or
Right. Right.
even kind for that matter. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, all those times people say, if you haven't had a good interaction, getting answers and questions, and someone just says, "What the heck is wrong with you?"
Hmm.
Well, now you're blaming that person, and
Right.
that person's at that point, if they haven't already, now they're totally checked out. So
Yep. Yep. Yep.
that's probably a
Yep.
good time
There's
to just pause the whole conversation and come back
yeah.
later on.
Exactly. Yeah. Psychological safety. Go on. Let's.
Well, and even just
It-
basic respect is it seems like
yeah.
is going to be gone at that point, and so
That's true. Yeah.
people are just going to be fired up on both sides, and so that's a good
Hmm.
time to take a break. But what seems helpful is when you're talking about someone who doesn't want to answer. I've found, at least in my experiences, and I'm super curious to hear about how you manage this in a work setting, or maybe how that might transfer into how parents can interact with teenagers. But
Hmm.
just taking a step back, recognizing the situation and saying, okay, I'm not going to get exactly where I want to get to the way I thought I was. So let's recalibrate a little bit, and having the awareness to realize that you might have to change tack, or that you might have to approach this situation a little differently. But the foundation of that seems to be the recognition that this is changing, the situation is
Hmm.
changing, and then showing that other person or the other people you're talking with the respect to say, okay, I see where you guys are, or I see where you are. If it's just one person,
Right.
I'm going to respect where you are. Let's approach this a little differently, and maybe a little more gradually, or a little more circuitously, or just put it down for a minute and go back to talking about the weather, or that person's vacation, or what they did last weekend, or whatever it might be. Building some of that rapport, giving a little bit of a pause before diving back into something that might be a little more uncomfortable or challenging can often
Hmm.
be really helpful. And then over time, as you do that more and more often, you become a little bit more trusted with that person. It helps to get to those types of tougher conversations a little faster, or those more challenging questions a little faster, or invites openness a little faster. So that I found that can help quite a bit. How about you? How have you tried to navigate those situations where people are just a little bit hesitant to engage with you?
Yeah. I think there's a certain degree of rapport building that opens the door to people wanting to participate, right? So, and then when you come up against those questions that are harder for them to answer, um, or maybe they're even very resistant to answer,
Mhm,
to
mhm.
say, "Hold on, let's take a break. Let's."
Yeah,
I like that you said that, because oftentimes we're just like we just got to get this done, right? But even if it's, can we come back to that question again?
mhm, mhm.
Let's move on to something else. But we do have to get an answer to that, right? So understand that there is some imperative to having some of these questions
Right,
answered, right there.
right.
But to be a little more patient, and exercise that kind of emotional intelligence, I think
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
is very important, because
right.
yeah, when we have a short fuse, or we're trying to like force something, um
Very hard,
that
very
yeah,
hard.
yeah, that amygdala is like, okay, I don't want anything to do with this. I'm either going to fight you and not play along, or I'm going
Right.
to be like, I'm going to shut down. I'm going to
I'm going to shut
freeze.
down, or I'm going to flight and just flee. I'm out,
Right. Right.
physically or emotionally, just checking out. Yeah.
Yep. Or
Or
skirt around the question
yeah, or
by
fawning.
fawning.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think that we've been kind of also teasing around it, but reframing the question, going back, like you were just saying, going back to what the imperative is, but why this is so important for the organization, and not
Mm.
to beat people's heads with that, but just to understand that there's a reason why we're asking these types of questions with someone, and make sure that they're understanding that and bought into that, and that can help to reground and help everyone get back on the same page.
Yeah.
Because if they're
Yeah.
not aligned with that vision, then that the line of questioning may be completely irrelevant at that point. If they're not aligned, or if they're having trouble seeing that vision, you may have to stop your line of inquiry and go back and make sure that they're understanding the vision, buying into it. And then that goes back to a lot of things we've talked about on our prior 74 episodes, but that they're also motivated to
Mm-hmm.
be part of that journey. If those all hold true, and they are, then you can get back into your line of questioning and figure out what the right approach might be,
Sure.
that
Sure.
kind of thing.
And one of the things I found sometimes when I should probably do this a little more often than I do, right? Is, we've been talking for a while. How are you feeling right now?
Hmm.
On a scale of, 1 to 5 or whatever, where are you in this conversation, and do we need to take a break and come back to it? Do you
Hmm.
need to just, have a minute or two
Right.
to yourself? I think just kind of getting a sense of, the room, the audience, right, where they're at, and then meeting them where they're at, meeting those needs,
That's a great
can
idea for a comic, meeting them where they're at. We have a Hermie about that.
we do, that's
But
for
you're
sure.
absolutely right. Having that check-in can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And again, shows just an awareness of the situation, the emotional intelligence to understand that people might not be where you are, or whatever their thought processes may still be unfolding, but giving them the space to just pause and see how they're doing. That's great.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, honestly, and I know it's like late in this episode to bring this up, but there are some times where there is, the urgency that's happening with change, right? Where something, um, we need to have these questions like urgently answered so that we can move forward, because things are very time bound, right? Um, have you found anything that's useful that might be outside of what we just talked about? Or, so it's like, and maybe that's a whole episode, is how do you, we've done a little of this, but how do you remain composed and yet still urgent? Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah, that might be a little more than we want to spend time unpacking today, but the
Yeah.
shorter answer is just to go back to the why, and helping people understand why you need an answer sooner rather than later, or why it's important, why it's so critical to this effort that we're on, to have that answer sooner rather than later, and show the
Sure.
consequences of that. So if we don't get this decided by a certain time point, that's going to delay these other things, and that causes these other issues. And some people might say that as, oh, good, I can gum up the works. And other people might see that as, oh, okay, now I understand why I need to do this sooner, because it's going to gum up the works if I don't. And how you respond to those are two very different types of things as well. But it all seems to come back to just, I keep beating this up, but it's the why, and helping people understand why you need to know. I mean, so often with the teenager, it's not about grilling them for the sake of grilling them. It's just, why do you want to know? Because you
Yeah.
care about them.
Right.
You're curious.
Right. So it's the change agent or the change manager or the change leader, whatever role that the person is in that's doing the questioning. They have to play like two roles then, right? There's the for lack of a better word, interrogator, right? But there's the person who is questioning, asking, and eliciting a
Right.
response from somebody, right? To
Right.
gather requirements, gather sentiment, gather data,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then at the other side of it, they have to be the storyteller, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And I would also add a third role in terms of moderator.
Mm,
They have to be able to be in the moment, asking questions, listening to responses. And those are two very different skills as well. Um,
sure.
they also have to be tying it back to the storytelling arc that you mentioned, but they also have to have that moderator mentality to understand when do I ask people the check-in that you were just mentioning, how are they doing, when do I go a little faster or a little harder, say, look, we've been at this for a long time, we just need to sort this out because of X, Y, and Z, versus,
Right.
okay, we're just gonna take a break and we'll come back after lunch or whatever. All of those things. Sometimes you
Yeah.
just need different people playing different roles, and so that's why it can be helpful to have multiple people working as a team on this type of effort, so that one person doesn't have to do all of those. We didn't
Sure.
even mention the scribe. So how do you record all this information? You're asking questions, you're getting responses, you're checking in with people, you're moderating, you're tying it back to the story. Someone has to be capturing all this knowledge. How do you do that? Um,
Right.
you
Right.
know, you can transcribe conversations, but at some point you have to draw out those insights. That's a whole different
Hmm.
role too. So there's plenty of activity there.
Yeah. Yeah. That might be a good tee up for another episode, just on how to capture the insights that you're getting from these questioning sessions, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
do with the data
Right. Right.
or the sentiment?
All right, Ben.
Nice
Well,
one.
so asking better questions, it's a complicated thing. I mean, it really is.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take a lot of cognitive effort, but
Right.
it may not always be easy, but it's certainly
Right.
important to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, I think if there's one thing that we might suggest, it would be to be patient and caring for the people you're talking with,
Sure.
and try to understand their perspective.
Yeah. And some one other thing to bring into this is if you're talking about the moderation part of it, right? Sometimes it is helpful to have a third party
Mm-hmm.
moderator come in and work with the change agent leader, manager, whatever that role is,
Mm-hmm.
to help them by being the one to formulate and deliver those questions, because it's a neutral party, right?
Yeah.
It's-
Or the same. It can be very helpful to have a neutral third party being the one in the trenches, asking questions, soliciting
right.
responses, gathering information, because they are a neutral third party. A lot of the emotional valence is sort of set aside as you're
Right.
gathering this information, and so it can be very helpful to be in that role, and in that sort of neutral role.
For
Yeah,
sure.
all kinds of positives to that. There maybe that's a whole. I know you and Cheryl were just talking about that, but maybe there's more to unpack there as far as where is it helpful, or when can it be helpful to be a neutral person in a
Right.
conversation.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was episode 74. So check that out. Right on. All right, Ben. Well, we're up at that time now.
Hmm.
Thanks a million, folks, for
Absolutely.
tuning into this
Yeah.
podcast. If we'd love to hear your questions, we'd
Yeah.
love to hear your feedback. So
Right.
please,
Suggestions,
drop a
comments,
question
concerns, questions.
for sure.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, until we meet again, make change your friend. Thanks for listening to Harmonious Workplaces. You can find Harmonious Workplaces on LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, Apple, and other streaming platforms. We'd love any feedback on whatever channel you find us on. Please rate, like, and share our podcast with your network, and remember to add Harmonious Workplaces to your list of favorites to get notified about each new episode. To contact Rich or Cheryl, please visit www.workbalanceconsulting.com. To connect with Ben, find him on LinkedIn or visit at www.harborsidestrategy.com.